The defendant appeals from a judgment convicting him after a jury trial of murder in the second degree and criminal possession of a weapon in the second degree. Defendant's contention that the county court erred in charging the jury with respect to depraved indifference murder is not preserved for our review, and in any event, that contention lacks merit. Also unpreserved for our review is defendant's contention that the conviction of depraved indifference murder is not supported by legally sufficient evidence. That contention is without merit in any event, and the verdict is not against the weight of the evidence. We reject defendant's contention that the evidence supports only a theory of intentional murder and not depraved indifference murder. Although the evidence at trial could support the conclusion that defendant intended to kill the victim, it also could support the conclusion that under circumstances evincing a depraved indifference to human life, defendant recklessly engaged in conduct that created a grave risk of death for another person. The evidence established that after an argument with the victim over which team would play the next basketball game, defendant left the community center but returned 10 minutes later with a gun. Defendant testified that he brought the gun only to scare the victim, but the gun went off after an argument with the victim, resulting in the death of the victim. The jury could have found that defendant held the gun close to the victim and then pulled the trigger, thereby concluding that this was an instantaneous, impulsive shooting, perhaps to disable or frighten the victim rather than to kill him. As in Sanchez, defendant herein asked the court to charge manslaughter in the second degree as a lesser included offense, in effect conceding that there was a reasonable view of the evidence that defendant committed reckless homicide but not intentional murder. The court did not err in allowing a witness to testify that shortly before the shooting he was with defendant while defendant was conversing with another man about purchasing a gun. The evidence was probative of defendant's intent to commit murder. And in addition, the testimony was necessary to complete the narrative of events leading up to the murder. Defendant further contends that the court erred in failing to give limited instructions following that testimony and is not preserved for our review. Defendant was not denied a fair trial by prosecutorial misconduct. On summation, the court issued curative instructions after actions by defendant, and in the absence of any further objection or request for a mistrial by defendant, the curative instructions must be deemed to have corrected the error to the defendant's satisfaction. Finally, the sentence is not unduly harsh or severe. It is hereby ordered that the judgment so appealed from be, and the same hereby is unanimously affirmed. Further, although defendant had spent 4 nights of the complainant's activity at the apartment with the complainant's permission, defendant had no reasonable basis for reviewing or believing that he had a possessory interest in the premises after the complainant had asked him to leave the premises approximately 1 week later. It was believed he had a right to enter the premises, and that was belied by his assigned statement by police, to which he admitted that he and his brother forced open the door of the apartment and took a DVD VCR unit that did not belong to them, which they subsequently added with respect to a third party. Thus, we further conclude that the verdict is not against the weight of the evidence with respect to the petty larceny charge. Based on the testimony of the complainant, a police officer, and the owner of the building that the door or door frame was damaged from, We also conclude that the verdict is not against the weight of the evidence with respect to the charge of criminal mischief. 240.